All right, today's Devo started out small, like all of them, but it kind of kept growing in my mind, and that was one of the difficult things was to try to figure out. At some point, I realized that I needed to cut it into a couple of different pieces, and that was a little bit difficult because it's intertwined. So the next couple of days are going to be connected. And then, as I'm driving around and trying to sort this out, a third kind of thought popped in that's kind of a connection. So at the very minimum, we're going to have kind of 3 days. They're going to each day, and I try to do it so that each day is a separate application. I don't want to multiple applications within one lesson. Just kind of want to leave you with a different thought each day. So I will try to do this without giving away the next days or kind of crossing over into the next day's thought, but it's still establishing kind of a thread here. What I want to talk about today is I want you to think to a lot of us are still kind of interested in information about this. Some of you are decidedly against any information and really would just rather not think about anything to do with a certain CV. And so I understand all of that. However, some of you who do look for maybe you're hoping to find some good news here and there, I want you to think about the people that you've seen and watched as a source for information. Who have you trusted for a source of information? And I can tell you that they all have pretty much two things in common. And one is that you've seen pretty much a steady diet of medical experts. Okay? That's the first thing that you've seen in common. There's been, whether you're on more maybe on your local news, I mean, we've seen some politicians and things like that give things, but as far as when an expert is referred to, it's a medical expert of some sort, some background. They might be a virologist, or they might be a pathologist, or what have you, a CDC person or spokesman, whatever, but they all have medical background. And the second thing that we notice is that they all agree. Pretty much they all, for them, I can't think of anybody I've heard that disagrees about anything. And I want to explore that just a little bit. And we're going to make a completely unrelated application to this, so don't worry about where I'm going, okay? But now, first of all, probably when we say, well, they're all medical experts, we're in kind of a medical situation. Who else would we want talking to us other than medical experts? That would seem like a good qualification to have. A lot of times we think, we don't really need to be seeing actors talking about things that they don't know about. Sometimes you get upset about athletes. You might get upset about athletes talking about things that they have no idea what they're talking about. But at least, medical experts, we should have medical experts talking about things of medical nature. Hold on to that thought. And you say, well, here's a nation, and there's a panic, and there's all these things. It's good to present a united front, and kind of have everybody in unison declaring what we need to do. We need a single message, and those things I think are often a good policy, to have people who know what they're talking about it, and to have people presenting a united front. And I know it's good. We do this in our family. We try to present a united front in our family. We try to discuss things, and sometimes parents have disagreements. We try to keep those away from our children. That doesn't always work. It probably doesn't work in your family either. But I want to talk about then what I think in some situations, because I'm not a child, because I have the ability to rationalize, it's not exactly the same situation as parents with children. I'm an adult, and I have the ability to decipher and form my own opinions and things like that. So here's what it would have been nice for me to see. I think it would have been better, and maybe we would see, even if nothing eventually changed, what I would have preferred to see in the situation that we've all been in is a number of things. I would have liked to seen not just medical experts consulted about things, because all of our policies right now are being shaped by what medical experts see. And medical experts have their background of expertise, but that's what they know. I would have liked to seen some constitutional lawyers brought in to discuss kind of the effects on a society. Even if their decision wasn't ultimately the one that determined what we do, even if we were going to eventually go with what the medical experts say, it would have been at least nice to see them consulted and say, there are some issues that we should possibly be considering as governors just kind of forbid, things that are directly mentioned in the First Amendment, like, the freedom to assemble and move about as a people, or the freedom to express, your religion as you see fit. That would have been nice for a constitutional expert to weigh in on. It would have been nice for, say, economics professors and experts weigh in on the effects of things that are going to happen in society. That would have been, even if their particular background wasn't the basis of an eventual decision, it would have been nice to at least have that thought. Let's at least consider some other important things to a society and the ramifications of what we're doing. It would have been nice to see experts who disagree have a discussion about things. Why? Well, again, I'm an adult, and I think I'm capable of handling different people having differences of opinion. I mean, we see it we have political debates. I mean, up until recently, political debates were a thing. We have formats for people to publicly disagree, and this helps us consider decisions that we're going to make and do as a society. For example, our votes. So we have debates. I know for a fact, because I can search and find them, people with advanced medical degrees that don't necessarily disagree, or don't necessarily agree, with everything that's being said by the people that are put in front of the cameras. It would have been nice to say, yes, but what about this? Or here's this thing that this study shows, and there's this statistic, or there's, it would have been nice to hear a variety of opinions. Now, I want to leave the discussion of what's going on in our society and talk about something that I think is a little bit more important, because this will fade, but we will still be left with, I think, what is a common human tendency, and I've seen it in the church, and even at times I've been guilty of this, especially when I was younger. We attach ourselves to certain forms of information, and we trust certain forms of information. And Solomon wrote, he said it two different ways, and it is kind of interesting because it maybe does apply to our situation. He said in Proverbs 11:14, he says, "In the multitude of many counselors, there is safety." We're talking about being safe. And another thing, what are we talking about? He addressed that in Proverbs 24 and verse 6. He says, "In the abundance of many counselors, there is victory." Well, that's another thing we're talking about, is defeating this thing, and all hands on deck and everything. I mean, he says the key to doing this and accomplishing what you want is to have many counselors. Now, you might have counselors that disagree, but until you have a broad base of information, not just disagreeing sources, but sources that think of a different concept that needs to be weighed. So a medical expert will only weigh medical things because that's what they're trained in, whereas an economist, he thinks, here's the impact of this. Here's the legal aspect. And there's probably lots of different aspects that I'm not mentioning. I'm just mentioning three just for an example. But in church, what have we often done when we discuss things? We often try to present a united view. Well, that's not bad. There are times where it's important in a church to, especially when you have younger people who aren't trained necessarily to discern things spiritually, to try to make sure. Paul did this. He shut down people once in a discussion about things. He says, "Nope, they're not ready for an open debate, so we're just shutting you down." Uh, but there were times where there was a council and people debated things in Acts chapter 15, for example, and people debated. They had different opinions, and so there was a discussion about things. Then they came to a conclusion. I think it's important for us to have different people and explore different sources of information. A lot of times, Christians and preachers only consult a very limited number of sources that they trust, and they determine these sources that they trust based on various things. It might be, I only trust Church of Christ sources, right? So in the Church of Christ, I only trust Church of Christ. If you're a Baptist, you might only trust Baptist sources, and so on and so forth. So I know a lot of people, since I'm a minister in the Church of Christ, that only, I've heard, they'll just go to this, or they'll only allow themselves to entertain or explore one concept. So I'll give you an example. I'm fairly decided on where I stand on evolution. Right? I don't place much stock in it at all. That doesn't mean I will not read a source that is an evolutionary source. If nothing else, it helps me to understand the things that they're presenting, and I'm a mature enough person that I can entertain different things and without the fear that I'm going to go astray or whatever. But a lot of people sequester themselves into only quoting certain sources, and I've heard people quote things that I said, I can't. I might agree with your final conclusion, but the argument you're using to get there is awful. I've seen that quite a few times because of such a limited and narrow group of sources. I have, in broadening the scope of what I entertain, I have found that there has been a number of times where I have trusted a Catholic source better than a Church of Christ commentary. I've even agreed with a Jehovah's Witness commentary over a Church of Christ commentary. And I say that, and you're like, oh, stop the presses, and we need to contact his eldership. But I have to be open to the fact that people can be wrong. I can be wrong. I've been wrong, and I'll be wrong again. And that means if someone read something I wrote while I was wrong, they might find a source that's not even a Christian that is more correct than me on something. So I want to use kind of a source or a event that's going on around us to illustrate something that will have legs after we leave this situation, as we go back to church eventually, and as we research topics and try to figure out what we believe as a church, and as we educate other people, to broaden your horizons, because in the multitude of many counselors there is wisdom, there is safety, and there is eventually victory.